Hi, I'm Ben McKenzie and not Elizabeth Flux. Welcome to Pratchat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast. Each month we discuss one of Terry Pratchett's books with a special guest, though this month our regular episode discussing the folklore of Discworld has had to be delayed, so it won't be coming to you until next month. But we don't want to leave you empty-eared, so as usual, here is an emergency replacement episode. Since we release our episodes on the twice fourth of each month, every March we release an episode on International Women's Day. This year's theme for IWD is Rights, Justice, Action. It's a call to address the disparity in legal protections and access to justice for women around the world. Now, we can't do much about that on a book club podcast, but we can at least encourage you to visit the unwomen.org website and learn more about this year's theme and the campaigns to address these issues. That theme is maybe new to many of you because it's likely your workplace is using a very different theme. That's because in 2001, a British marketing firm created the website internationalwomensday.com. They, or whoever currently owns the website, makes sure it appears at the top of the search results for IWD, and every year it releases a much safer theme, something corporations can use to brand their cupcake drives and which doesn't force them to talk about any actual issues of inequality. For this year, it's Give to Gain. It's not really got the same bite as Rights, Justice, Action, does it? Anyway, since it's International Women's Day and we're running perilously low on remaining Terry Pratchett books, I thought we'd tie the two themes together and have some recommendations for new authors for you to read, but make all of them women. Now, most of these are suggestions from you, our listeners and subscribers, and even a previous guest or two. And many of them I've never read, in fact, nearly all of them. So I'm excited to get their work onto my to-be-read pile, hence the title of this episode, or the hashtag at least, which is Pratchat IWDTBR, because who doesn't like mashing a couple of acronyms together? Now, I'll add a few recommendations from myself and Liz, though you've probably heard us mention a lot of those before on the podcast. I've kind of put these recommendations into a few different categories, and first up is what I call the grab bag. Now, that makes it sound a little bit random. It's not random. It's just that we got a lot of recommendations, and a lot of them were authors that just one person recommended. So that's what this category is. This is all the people who were recommended by just one person. And look, a lot of you didn't say why you recommended these authors. And I do suspect that, like most of the time when you ask people for recommendations like this, a lot of them are just your favorite authors who are women. And that's fine. That's totally fine. But I have tried to do a little bit of research and have something to say about each one. But again, I just want to remind you, for most of these authors, I have not read them. I don't know them well. Well, let's go. I've put these ones in alphabetical order because that seemed fairest. So first off the rank, Charlie Jane Anders, who is a prolific multi-award-winning American science fiction author, mostly writes young adult and adult novels, recommended by Stuart Hodge, who gave us quite a few good recommendations, actually. Margaret Atwood is next. Now, surely you know who Margaret Atwood is. She's properly famous, and there are a few authors in that category who you'll be hearing about in this episode. She's a Canadian author. She mostly writes speculative fiction. Her most famous novel is The Handmaid's Tale. Perhaps like me, you read it in high school. I don't know. I've read that. I've also read The Blind Assassin, another one of her well-known books. She also wrote the Oryx and Crake trilogy. I haven't read those. And most recently, she wrote The Testaments, which is a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. She's written lots of short fiction too, and poetry. She was recommended by Ian Banks, and she's great. Next up is Lauren Buekes, a South African author. Her work blends sometimes quite violent crime and mystery, but with speculative fiction. And I've actually read the book that was recommended by Steve Lay, who was the one who recommended her, which is The Shining Girls. I read it for a book club many years ago now. I think it was about a decade or so ago. And I did enjoy it. I thought it was really good. It's pretty grim in some ways. So you should go into it knowing that, I think. But yeah, it's really weird and interesting. Not quite like anything else. If you don't like violence or horror, maybe it's not for you. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily class it as horror, but yeah, it's weird. It's weird fiction, weird science fiction. Kaliane Bradley, that's Kaliane with a K and one N, is an English writer and editor, and her debut novel is The Ministry of Time, which made quite a splash. And my partner read it. She thought it was pretty good. I don't think she loved it. I thought thought it was good though. But Steve Lay recommended this. He said it's especially recommended for people with a soft spot for the story of the Erebus and the Terror. And if you don't know what he's talking about there, those are two ships who vanished at the same time in the 19th century. I don't want to say too much more because I think The Ministry of Time, there's a bit of mystery in it. It's probably good if you go in not knowing more than the blurb tells you. Anyway, that's Kaliane Bradley. Lois McMaster Bujold is an American speculative fiction writer, and she's like, again, there's a lot of people you're going to hear from here who are like lauded, award-winning science fiction authors. And her most famous series from the 80s and 90s is about a guy called Miles Vorkosigan. I think that's how you say his name. I haven't read these. Who's an interstellar spy and mercenary, and it's set like 1,000 years in the future, which sounds pretty cool. That was recommended by Val. Thanks, Val, for recommending Lois McMaster Bujold. Next up, we have Stephanie Burgis, and this is one of a few authors recommended by Belle, one of our subscribers, who didn't just recommend them, but also wrote a little blurb for quite a few of them. So I'd like to just read what Belle had to say about Stephanie Burgis. Stephanie Burgis writes lightweight, humorous fantasy. She doesn't have the social commentary of Pratchett, but she has humour, a hugely diverse range of characters, and a lot of heart. I'd recommend her stories to a Pratchett reader who is in need of some light entertainment. That's a pretty great recommendation, actually. And I consider myself in need of some light entertainment, so I'm going to check out Stephanie Burgis. Next, we have CJ Cherryh. That's Cherry with a silent H at the end. Added because they thought cherry just spelt like the fruit sounded like a romance writer. I think I read that somewhere. Anyway, she's a famous American sci-fi author who was mostly publishing stuff in the 80s and the 90s, although she has written a few much more recent books. And she's known for like world building, doing a lot of research, and some of her books explore themes of gender, which seems quite topical for International Women's Day. So CJ Cherryh was recommended by Ian Banks. Thanks, Ian. Ian recommended quite a few. You're going to hear his name many times. Robin Hobb is next on the list, American novelist. She's also proper famous because she had an incredibly popular series in the 90s, the Farseer books, which begin with a book called Assassin's Apprentice from 1995. Now, my partner's read these books. She was a big fan of them, and she usually refers to them as Terrible Things Happen to Fitz Chivalry Farseer. That's the name of the main character. So maybe don't go in expecting that it's going to be a nice time for the main character. Anyway, Robin Hobb's books were recommended by Paul Patiki. Thanks, Paul. Here's another one from Belle, which is for India Holton. I'm just going to read what Belle had to say. India Holton writes amazing satirical romances. She is clear-eyed on the absurdity of humanity, especially gender roles, and delights in poking fun at societal expectations via competent protagonists in ridiculous situations. The way she uses absurdist humour to support the narrative reminds me of Pratchett. The humour and pathos are not tacked on or reliant on the story to deliver a punchline. Rather, they're baked into the world and the storytelling. Don't be put off by these being romances. Her writing is a delight. And I'm really delighted by this recommendation, Belle, because I'm kind of interested in reading some more romance for reasons I'll probably get into a little bit later in the podcast. But thank you. What a great recommendation. Belle also recommended the next one alphabetically, which is Gabby Hutchinson Crouch. And again, I'm going to read what Belle had to say. Gabby Hutchinson Crouch is wildly creative. Her satirical dry humour and eye for social absurdity make her stories a joy to read. Like Pratchett, she takes a social norm and writes about it with such clarity that it highlights its complete absurdity. In her Darkwood trilogy, she views traditional fairy tales through an alternate lens, using her highly competent protagonists to subvert expectations and the fantasy setting to question real-world norms around politics and social structures. That sounds amazing. Okay, I love this. Oh, God, there's some really cool stuff in this list. I can't read all of these books. Great recommendation there for Gabby Hutchinson Crouch. Next, alphabetically off the list, is Eleanor Janega, who is a medieval scholar, actually. So this is a non-fiction recommendation, and this has been passed on by Julie on Facebook. Julie said, "A dear friend, someone whose love for stories runs so deep they can, from heart, recite Harry McClary by Linley Dodd, got me and now my son into Pratchett. They recently recommended The Once and Future Sex, Going Medieval on Women's Roles in Society by Eleanor Janega. Their recommendations are always a gesture, filled with warmth and passion, fostering exploration of history, culture, gender, and identity, reminding me of the incredible power of stories to connect, inspire, and transform us." Julie, I think you have connected, inspired, and transformed me. What a beautiful thing to write, and how lovely of you to pass on that recommendation from somebody else. So that's Eleanor Janega, and the book in particular is The Once and Future Sex, Going Medieval on Women's Roles in Society. What a great recommendation for International Women's Day. The next up on this list is N.K. Jemisin, who's an American speculative fiction author, and she's actually been on my radar for a long time, and I still haven't got around to reading her books, but at least I do have finally a copy of the book Fifth Season, which is the first in her Broken Earth series, which is the series that Molokov recommended when recommending N.K. Jemisin. So yeah, check that one out. I'm going to read that, probably because I've got it. It's going to be one of the first ones on this list that I read. Next we have Karen Joy Fowler, who Ian Banks also recommended and described as just brilliant. That's short and sweet. She's an American fantasy, sci-fi, and literary fiction author, and her best-known book you may have heard of, it's the Jane Austen Book Club, which I've heard of, but I don't know much about. Also relevant to a podcast that I might mention later on in this episode. Tanith Lee is the next cab off the rank, who was a famous British fantasy and sci-fi author, also recommended by Ian. She wrote lots and lots of books, but probably, thematically closest to Discworld is her series called Tales from the Flat Earth. Yes, predates the Discworld, or at least is from around the same time as The Colour of Magic. I think the first one came out in the early to mid-'80s, so, similar kind of vintage. It's a series of novels and short stories. They're all set on the same flat but square fantasy world, and it's kind of inspired by 1001 Nights. I've heard it's pretty good. I haven't read it. I don't know anything about those, but she was around for a long time and wrote heaps of stuff. So that's one place to start, but maybe you could just look up any of her books. Thanks for that recommendation, Ian. Now we also have R.A. MacAvoy, who's another American sci-fi and fantasy writer. This list does skew quite American, which, they dominate English-speaking culture around the globe, unfortunately. They're probably all great authors. I would love to hear about more Australian authors. There are a couple in this list, but not that many, but also just authors from anywhere else. There's a few from other places. But anyway, we were talking about R.A. MacAvoy, who is an American sci-fi and fantasy writer. Another one of Ian's recommendations. Ian was really on fire. Like, he had a really good list. Now, I've heard of R.A. MacAvoy, or at least I've heard of her books. She's got a series that is quite well known among sci-fi nerds. It's called Lens of the World. But she also wrote a bunch of other stuff, including a book called The Book of Kells, which is a time travel romance set in Ireland, which, as you've probably guessed, involves the Book of Kells, a famous illuminated manuscript. So yes, thank you, Ian, for that recommendation, R.A. MacAvoy. C.L. Moore, another one from Ian's list, was one of a few people we're going to hear about who were writing kind of in the early, I don't know what the term is. It's Golden Age? Maybe Golden Age is right. I don't know. But certainly that early sort of pulp era, the 40s and 50s. But C.L. Moore was writing in the 1950s. And so this is quite possibly somebody, C.L. Moore, that Pratchett would have read, because we know he was, digging through those old sci-fi magazines and reading all of those short stories and stuff. So, maybe he read some C.L. Moore. You never know. Next on the list, Audrey Niffenegger. And now, you might recognize that name because even though she's not a super prolific author, I think she's only written a handful of books, but her first novel from 2003 was a massive hit. It's The Time Traveler's Wife. And Steve Lay recommended this one. And Steve, I don't think I said this on Blue Sky, which is where you were making your recommendations, but everything you recommended was something that I'd read, because I've read The Time Traveler's Wife as well. And I really liked it. I cried a lot. I cried like a baby. It was wow. It was emotional. It was rough. Although I will say my one criticism of the book is that it's titled The Time Traveler's Wife. It's not really about the wife at all. It's all about the time traveler. But, what are you going to do? It's still pretty good. Well worth a read. Next off the list is Andre Norton, who's another one of those early sci-fi writers from the 40s and 50s. Steve also recommended her, but his comment was, get some Andre Norton if you can find any. And that is the trick with those stories written by folks in the 40s and 50s. If you've got access to any of those anthologies, you might be able to find them, but, see how you go. Rebecca Roanhorse is next, who is another American sci-fi and fantasy author, but she's known for incorporating Indigenous American cultures into her work, both from North and South America. Not in the same books, I don't think. But anyway, Molokov recommended her, and particularly recommended her series Between Earth and Sky, which starts with a book from 2020 titled Black Sun. There's 3 of them at the moment. I think there's going to be more. So, check out Rebecca Roanhorse and Black Sun and the rest of the Between Earth and Sky series. Kristine Kathryn Rusch, that's Rusch, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is an American writer. She writes across multiple genres. Another one of Ian Banks's recommendations, and he described her as insanely prolific. So that's certainly something she has in common with Pratchett. Her speculative work includes a bunch, from what I could find, of alternate history, although the most famous ones, certainly the ones she's won awards for, do seem to be focused on American history. But I do like a good alternate history, so I think that's a pretty good recommendation. Thanks again, Ian. K.B. Spangler is an American writer of novels, and I like that we've got a Spangler in the list, because that's Moist von Lipwig's Albert Spangler, wasn't it? So anyway, this is K.B. Spangler. This is how you're going to remember. And don't worry, I will put all of these authors in a list in the episode notes so you can look them up. But anyway, this is K.B. Spangler, who's an American writer. She writes novels which blend sci-fi and fantasy. Like, one of them is about witches who can bend the universe to their will. It was pretty high concept stuff when I was looking up her website. So she writes those kinds of novels, and there's also some ones about a cyborg cop, I think. But also writes webcomics, and she's got 2 main ones. One's about queer teens, and the other one is about sort of conspiracies and involves a hyper-intelligent koala. The pictures of the koala were very cute. I like them. So, great. Check out K.B. Spangler. Thank you for that recommendation, Dr. Matthew Reed Krell. Now, the next author, J.A. Stevens, is recommended by one of our previous guests, Miff. Miff, who you might remember from our episode about Shaking Hands with Death, and also Masquerade. Great guest, an old friend of mine. She wanted to recommend the debut novel of J.A. Stevens, which is called A Change of Pace. It's a trailblazing historical romance that brings pride without prejudice to a reimagined, more inclusive Regency London. Another book on this list, which is quite relevant to a podcast I'm going to mention later. And look, she did want to disclose that she does know the author, but she did make it clear, but I do really like the book. So next recommendation is for Sue Townsend, who you will have heard us talk about on the podcast before. Ian Banks described her as not genre, just brilliant. And if the name is familiar and you can't place her, that's because she is the creator of Adrian Mole. Yes, The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole. Look, it's difficult to recommend something not knowing who you are, listener. You could be any age. You could be living anywhere in the world. You could have any kind of life experience and background. So I don't know if The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole is really going to resonate with people the same way it did for those of us who read it closer to the time it was published, when we were maybe closer to the age of Adrian Mole. But I think there's something about it that is certainly worth visiting. So, maybe look up The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole by Sue Townsend. And here's the last one for this first grab bag section. It's Kathryn Webb, who's a British author who also writes fantasy under a pen name Kate Griffin, and science fiction under another pen name, Claire North. She's not the only author who we're going to talk about who has multiple pen names. But the series that was recommended by Danielle on Blue Sky was under Kathryn Webb, and that's the Horatio Lyle series. That begins with the 2006 novel The Extraordinary and Unusual Adventures of Horatio Lyle. And I do like a series that has like that sort of long multiple adjective kind of title. I don't know, it's fun. It's a little bit retro. Now, Liz was unfortunately unable to join me to chat about her favorite books, but she did want to recommend a few people that she's recommended on the podcast before. She put these three people kind of together, but said that, then they have a different vibe to Pratchett, but they do have the same kind of skew-eyed look at the world. And if you've listened to the podcast for any length of time, probably the three authors I'm about to name will not be a surprise to you. The first one is Agatha Christie, who, look, if you don't know who Agatha Christie is, I don't know what to tell you. Probably the most famous mystery writer in the English language, rivaled only by Arthur Conan Doyle, who's obviously not on this list. Yeah, look, go out. If you never read an Agatha Christie, go out and read one. I can't remember. There is a previous episode where we talked about Agatha Christie and I asked Liz to recommend what one should you start with. I don't think it matters. I think all of the ones I've read are pretty great. But, I think in the spirit of International Women's Day, maybe start with a Miss Marple. Start with a little old lady solving horrible murders. I think that's fun. Next on the list, Shirley Jackson. We mentioned her on the podcast a couple of times, particularly when Penelope Love was our guest for a couple of Pratchett short stories. She was an American horror and mystery writer. If you don't know her name, you probably definitely know some of her most famous work, which includes the novel The Haunting of Hill House, and also the incredibly famous and influential short story, The Lottery. There's a lot of good anthologies of her work. She's written a lot of short stories, but maybe avoid the 2015 collection, Let Me Tell You, because as Penny said when she was a guest, she kind of felt it was maybe a little bit of a money-making exercise by Jackson's children after she died, because it's all stuff that was clearly unfinished. So don't read that one, but go and find any of her other anthologies, especially one with a lottery in it. If you've never read The Lottery, read it. Like it's great. It's great. I mean, you'll probably read it and go, oh, but I kind of know this story because it's been so influential. It's leaked into other things, but it's good to go read the original. It's worth it. And then finally for Liz's list, we've got, who else could it be? It's Diana Wynne Jones, right? Who was a British children's author, mostly writing fantasy, probably one of the strongest recommendations for Pratchett fans. This whole episode, we had a few other people recommend her. And look, surely you know about this already. You know who Diana Wynne Jones is because we've talked about her so many times. We have promised that when we're finished with the Pratchett podcast, we will do a Diana Wynne Jones podcast, or at least a few episodes about her work. Liz especially likes the Chronicles of Chrestomanci series, but also quite a lot of her other books, and she's mentioned lots of them over the course of the podcast, so I won't go back and try and find all of the recommendations, but check her out. Check out Diana Wynne Jones. I really like Howl's Moving Castle, the book that the film is based on. The book's quite different to the film. The basic plot is kind of the same, but the themes are quite different. It's about different things. But I also really like her very satirical work, The Tough Guide to Fantasyland, which is it's like a tourist guide to the place where all of the fantasy novels take place. Now, as well as Liz's list, I do just want to mention we've had, of course, a lot of amazing women on the podcast as guests who are writers. Not all of them are novelists, and not all of them write fiction particularly, or at least haven't been published writing fiction, but I do want to mention all of the writers that we've had. Now, I think I got everybody. If I've left anyone out, I apologize. But the people we've had on this show who are writers, whose work you can get hold of and read, include Stephanie Convery, Claire Coleman, Karen K. Carlisle, Kat Clay, Kat Day. I know that's confusing, isn't it? But Kat Clay and Kat Day are two different people. Freya Daly Sadgrove, Amy Gray, Amy Kaufman, Laura Jean McKay, Marley Jane Ward, Tansy Rayner Roberts, who was also recommended by Molokov, by the way. And if you want to read one of Tansy's books, I reckon start with one of her recent ones, The Time of the Cats. Very silly, very funny book. Rhianna Pratchett has been a guest and was also recommended by Cameron Biggett. Of course, there's an obvious reason why you might be reading Rhianna Pratchett anyway. But remember, she hasn't just written Tiffany Aking's Guide to Being a Witch. She's also written her own fiction and comic books and video games. Check out her work. It's really, really good. Lily Wilkinson and Carl Wilson, GNU Carl Wilson, who, as well as being an amazing comedian and human being, also wrote a great series of very fun children's books. So those are all of our guests who are women and who are writers who've been published. I would probably, this is where I have to admit, I haven't read something written by all of our guests. But if we're talking fiction, if we're talking novels, definitely read Amy Kaufman, Marley Jane Ward, Claire Coleman, Tansy Rayner Roberts. Yeah, they're all good, but those are the ones that I've read personally. So I'm going to stick another recommendation in for them. I've got to recommend a few of my own before I get to the really popular ones. And I'm going to mention a few, one of which has been recommended by other people. In fact, a couple of them have. Naomi Novik has been recommended by Molokov, who really likes her Scholomance series. And Naomi's an American-Polish author, so she really uses a lot of that sort of Polish and Eastern European folklore in her work, which is really interesting, gives it a very different feel to a lot of more sort of Western European folklore-based fantasy. I haven't read the Scholomance series, but my partner is a massive fan of Naomi Novik, has been for a long time, and really enjoyed the Scholomance series. It's a quite a different take on the magic school kind of genre, so worth a look if you like that sort of thing. I really like the book that my partner recommended to me and that we bonded over when I read it when we were first getting together, which is Uprooted. It's one of her earlier books. It's kind of like a remix of a traditional fairy tale. So I really enjoyed it. I think it's great. I think she's got quite a wry sense of humor. She does romance pretty well, certainly in Uprooted. So that's a bit of a point of difference to Pratchett. She's also really well known for a series called the Temeraire series. I haven't read those, but they're kind of like, what if Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons? That's basically the pitch. So if you like the sound of that, give that a go. There's a role-playing game coming out soon based on it. So clearly it's still pretty popular. Another one that I would recommend, who's also been recommended by others, in fact, Miff and Steve Lay both recommended her, is one of my favorite authors of all time, Susannah Clarke, who's most famous for a really chonky novel which came out in the mid-2000s called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And I love this book. I mean, people talk about it. It's like, you know, Jane Austen, but with fairies. I don't think that's entirely accurate. Like it's set in a similar time period, not the same time period, but a similar time period. Maybe it is set in the Regency era. I don't know. Anyway, it's pretty great. It's got a lot of footnotes. It's got a very wry sense of humor. I don't know that everyone would find it funny. And it's very, very long, but I really, really love it. If you don't want to try something really, really long, she more recently wrote a book called Piranesi, which is much, much shorter. I think very different in many, many ways, but also just great. And I think this is one of the reasons I'm so impressed with Susannah Clarke, is that she can write this incredibly long, detailed, magical bit of, I don't know, it's like a textbook in play. I mean, because a lot of the footnotes are from textbooks about how magic works. It's really interesting. And then Piranesi is this very short novella, which is just as compelling. It's really good. And weird, really weird. I don't think that one's as much like Pratchett, but it's certainly still got a bit of her sense of humor in it. And it's really interesting. And she's written some short stories as well, most of which are based in the same fairy magic universe, which are good. I've read those too. So yeah, I recommend Susannah Clarke, and so does Miff, and so does Steve Lay. I'll recommend two others, and then I'm going to move on to the ones that more than one of you recommended. C.M. Wagner is an American author. She's written a few books. I don't think she's written heaps, but her first couple, I think they were her first couple, are fantasy novels that feel quite different. They feel a little bit quirky, a little bit weird. It's set in its own kind of fantasy world, which doesn't quite feel like other fantasy worlds. I think it's got that going for it, in similarity to Pratchett. Again, she writes a good romance as well in the books. So they're not really romance books, but they have a nice romance in them. I first read The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry, but that's actually the second of these two books. They're not really a a series, but they are connected. They take place in the same world. There's some little crossovers between them, and I read them in the reverse order. I actually like that I read them in the reverse order because that way the connection between the books was not at all obvious, whereas if you read them in the right order, it would be. So the first one is actually called Unnatural Magic, and the other one is called The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry. I really like those books. They have a really distinct voice. They're very funny. There's just some really weird stuff in there that I really like. She's got an interesting take on trolls, which is very different to the Pratchett take on trolls, but it's also quite different to other takes on trolls that I've seen. I recommend it. And the last one I'll recommend, I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before, is Tamsyn Muir's The Locked Tomb books. Now, Tamsyn Muir's a writer from New Zealand. This is like her big debut series. I mean, I think she's written some other stuff as well, but this is what she's best known for. The first book is called Gideon the Ninth. It's followed by Harrow the Ninth and Nona the Ninth. And you can't really describe it in any way except to say it's weird lesbian necromancers in space. If you like the sound of that, read it. I think the reason that I would recommend it to Pratchett fans, it's just really funny. It's just really funny. It's not the same sense of humor as Pratchett. I don't know. There's something about the energy of it, something about the tone of it that I think certainly Pratchett fans who like modern fiction as well would get a kick out of. And it's just weird. It's not like anything else, you know? So yeah, I love those books. I will warn you that the fourth one, which should be the last one of that series, seems to be delayed. No one's quite sure when it's going to come out. If that's a thing that bothers you, know that going in. But I really like the first book, and I also really like the second and third ones. Even if I never get another one, I'm really glad I've read them. So yeah, I recommend them. All right, here we go. This was going to be a little like replacement emergency podcast. And then I got a little too into it and researched a bunch of these authors, and it took me ages. So this has gotten much more in depth than I expected. But this is the last section. These are the authors that more than one of you recommended. So at least a couple of people recommended these. I've presented them in kind of the order of how many recommendations they got, but I want to be upfront with you. Most of them got 2. We got recommended a lot of different authors, but then it kind of really ramps up at the end. So stick with me. You're going to get the best recommendation, or hopefully the best recommendation right at the end. I haven't put the ties in any particular order though. So here we go. Emily Tesh is an English author, and her debut novel, which is called Some Desperate Glory, won a Hugo. There's a few people on this list who've done this. I don't know. How do you do that? How do you win one of the most prestigious awards in science fiction with your first published book? That's intense to me. That's incredible. Anyway, this is Emily Tesh. She's won some other major awards, and her latest book came out last year. Is called The Incandescent. It's got a pretty incandescent cover, actually. It's very bright pink, but it was recommended by previous guest on this podcast, Kat Day, who I also mentioned because she is a writer. She recommended this book, The Incandescent by Emily Tesh, and it was in turn recommended to her by Aaron of the Complete Discography podcast, one of our fellow Pratchett podcasts. So there you go. There's a couple of recommendations for Emily Tesh. Anne McCaffrey is another one of those proper famous fantasy authors that I've mentioned her in the list. She's best known for the Dragon Riders of Pern series, although she's written just a load of stuff, a load of other stuff. And we've mentioned her on the podcast quite a few times. Those Dragon Riders books are largely what Pratchett is parodying in that Wormberg section of The Colour of Magic. So, you know, if you want to know your famous sci-fi and fantasy, you got to read some Anne McCaffrey. That was recommended by Ian Banks and also by Steve Lay. They didn't specifically recommend Dragon Riders of Pern. They just recommended Anne McCaffrey. So get out there and see what you like the look of for her. And look, if you're thinking, how do I start with any of these authors? Do what we recommend for Pratchett. Just look up a few of their books, read a blurb. If the blurb sounds interesting, pick that one and read it. The worst thing that can happen is you don't like it, and then you can just stop reading it and read something else. That's how you find new authors that you like. So, yeah, do that with Anne McCaffrey or any of these other authors. Arkady Martine is the pen name of an American science fiction author whose other name is Anna Linden Weller. Her first 2 novels both won Hugo Awards. I said there was more than one. Those first 2 novels are A Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called Peace. Even the names are incredible. I mean, wow. Anyway, she was recommended by Molokov and by Bell, And Bell, who has only read the first of those two books, A Memory Called Empire, said, Martine's fantastic world building uses a sci-fi setting to examine colonialism and cultural biases. Her deep sense of humanity gives you a lot to think about while still being an entertaining read. I think you can see the connection there to Pratchett. So, yeah, that's a pretty strong recommendation. That's Arkady Martine and A Memory Called Empire. Our next recommendation is for an Australian author. Hooray! Of course, we do have some other Australian authors in the list, mostly our guests, who are generally speaking from Australia or New Zealand. So if you're interested in fiction from our part of the world, please get into the list of guests that I mentioned earlier. Or Jessica Townsend, who was recommended both by David Butler and also by Bell. Her series, the Nevermore series, is what they're recommending. David says it's probably really good for people who enjoy Terry's fiction for younger readers. There are 4 of them so far. The first one's called Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow. It's from 2017, but the series is still going, I think. I think the most recent one's from 2024, but there'll probably be more. And here's what Bell had to say about her. Jessica Townsend's middle grade Nevermore series starts out similar to Harry Potter. However, by the 3rd book, she truly comes into her own. Pratchett fans will enjoy the atmospheric world building in a fantasy setting and quirky characters. They'll also likely enjoy the increasing social commentary. The 3rd book was written during COVID lockdowns, and the 4th as she was working through her ADHD diagnosis and long COVID, and you can feel the presence of those factors in the stories. Next up is Mary Robinette Kowal, that's Kowal, who was also recommended by Molokov and by Bell. She has a great bio. According to it, she is an American author, translator, art director, and puppeteer. She's worked with the Henson Company, and she worked on, if you've ever seen this show, you'll know it sticks in your mind. But she worked on the show Lazy Town. I mean, that's quite a resume. But her writing covers a whole gamut of stuff, short stories, novellas, novels. Bell reckons that she's a good fit for Pratchett fans because she uses competent protagonists and alternate world settings for social commentary. And she's written about all kinds of stuff. I think the more famous thing that she's written, the Lady Astronaut series. I think there's a novel and maybe some short stories. But anyway, she sounds amazing. I think we should all check out Mary Robinette Kowal. All right, we're in the home stretch now. Theodora Goss is an American novelist and a prolific short story writer. She's best known for the Athena Club series that begins with The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. And from what I could read about this, she's really looking at a bunch of fiction, particularly from the 19th century and early 20th century, and reimagining it through kind of a feminist lens or from a female perspective, which is cool. Anytime we reimagine stuff, I really love that, particularly if it's things that I really already like. And Steve Lay was one of the people who recommended this. The other one was Kathryn. And Steve said he thinks this is especially the thing for anyone who enjoys Gothic fiction. So that's Theodora Goss and the Athena Club series. Now, of course, at least a couple of people recommended Ursula Le Guin, and probably she could have been bumped up here because I would probably recommend her for the couple of things of hers that I've read. But she is one of the other most famous sci-fi and fantasy authors, or I should say she was. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. But she's most famous for her Earthsea series, which begins with the book A Wizard of Earthsea, which is normally for younger readers. But she's written so many other things that are so influential. She was reckoned by Bell and Steve, who had this to say about her. Maybe a word of warning for the young whippersnappers who think reading Le Guin's Earthsea novels sounds like a good idea. It is, but be aware that Book 4, Tahanu, was written nearly 20 years later and is quite different in tone to the first 3. 50-plus-year-old Steve thinks it's the best thing she wrote. 20-ish-year-old Steve wasn't anywhere near mature enough to get the message. So I think that's good advice from Steve there. And I think I've only ever read the first 3, so now I want to go back and find that 4th one. Becky Chambers was recommended by a few people. She's an American author who's best known for the Wayfarer series. We've mentioned her on the podcast before. That starts with the 2014 novel The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it's about a tunneling ship that kind of builds hyperspace bypasses for other spaceships. They're not called that in the book. I'm just borrowing that term from Douglas Adams. My partner read those books. She really loved them. They're not all about the same characters. There's kind of crossovers, and I think she did find that a bit disappointing because she really liked the characters from the first book. But my partner loved them, so I'm recommending them on her behalf. And Belle also recommends Becky Chambers, and this is what she had to say. Becky Chambers is one of my favorite living authors. She doesn't write with humor or plot, but builds rich worlds and complex characters with a humanitarian eye that is thoughtful, comforting, and hopeful about humans, very much reminding me of Pratchett's humanitarianism. Like Pratchett, she writes with breadth and grace, using imaginary races and worlds to explore the devastating consequences of othering those who are different to us, how we can work together to improve systems, and to question what it means to live with ourselves in complex societies. Check them out. That's the Wayfarer series, or just more generally Becky Chambers, and her most famous one is the first one of those, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Seanan McGuire is an American urban fantasy author. I love urban fantasy. And I also love that she also has a cool bio, because right up front in it is that she's not just an author, she's also a filker. Yes, that's the nerdy practice of changing the lyrics of songs, or sometimes just writing new ones. So they're about nerdy stuff. But anyway, Seanan McGuire, she also writes under the names Mira Grant for science fiction and horror, and A. Deborah Baker for her children's series. She was recommended to us by Kathryn and by Stuart Hodge, and Stuart particularly recommends Every Heart a Doorway, and it has some sequels as well. What a great title, Every Heart a Doorway. There's some banger titles in this recommendations list. All right, we're in the last two now. So the second most recommended author is one that up until now was the most recommended author. So many of you who listen to this podcast have recommended this author to us. You probably know who Martha Wells is if you listen to this podcast, but if you don't, she's an American speculative fiction writer. She is most well known for The Murderbot Diaries, which is a series of novels and novellas and short stories all about an artificial secbot, an artificial security officer. Well, not quite a robot. It's a little bit ambiguous, but anyway, humanoid kind of robot person who breaks free of its programming, but then rather than becoming more human, really just becomes more itself, including naming itself Murderbot. Now, I have not read the books, but I have watched the TV series that's based on them, and I really want to read the books. The books start with All Systems Red from 2017, and the TV series is also really good. I think it's different in some important ways to the books, but I have heard a lot of people who like the books also really like the TV show, which is a good sign that it's a good adaptation. So that's Martha Wells and The Murderbot Diaries, which were recommended to us by Molokov and by Michael Donahoe and Stuart Hodge and Bell, who had this to say. Martha Wells's Murderbot will likely feel familiar to anyone who deals with trauma via sarcasm. It is my favorite character. Like Vimes or Granny Weatherwax, it is damn competent, perfectly capable of having a mental crisis whilst rescuing everyone from their own stupidity. I cannot do Murderbot justice in a few lines. Please just read the first chapter of All Systems Red on Tor.com. So you can go and read the first chapter for free. You should go and do it. And also check out the TV show if you're the sort of person who likes to get a taste of a book by its adaptation. I recommend it. But here we go. This is it. I won't do a drum roll because it's late and I'm tired and I didn't think this would take me this long. I'm going to be real with you. But we got more recommendations for this author than anybody else, and it wasn't even close, and I'd never even heard of them before yesterday. But the number one recommendation that we got was for T. Kingfisher, which is the pen name of Ursula Vernon, a name that I am kind of familiar with. I don't know why I'd never heard of T. Kingfisher. But anyway, Ursula Vernon is an American comic book writer and illustrator who is also the author of a bunch of young adult fantasy stories. But under the name T. Kingfisher, she writes fantasy for adults. And apparently a lot of you think she's a perfect match for Pratchett fans. Sal said that she has loads of Pratchett references and that although she has kind of a horror bent in her adult writing, she also has a guarantee that the dog will not die. So you never have to worry about animals in the books having bad things happen to them. I'm very okay with that. Anyway, Sal recommended the 2022 book Nettle and Bone, which won a Hugo and was a runner-up for a couple of other big awards, the Locus and the Nebula Awards. AJ Fidalgo recommended the 2013 book by T. Kingfisher, Nine Goblins, which they described as very Pratchettesque. And T. Kingfisher was also recommended by a bunch of other people, Sean Eric Fagan, Valerie Valdez, Aaron from the Complete Discography, Dr. Matthew Reed Krell, Val and Belle, look, it sounds like we all need to give T. Kingfisher a shot. So the two ones we've been recommended, Nine Goblins and Nettle and Bone. So many of you recommended T. Kingfisher. There's got to be something in that. So those are all the author recommendations. There's one other thing I want to do, which is to recommend other podcasts you can listen to where you can get more recommendations for women to read. I'm not going to try and make this a definitive list. That would take way too long, but I'm just going to recommend a few that I know have read Terry Pratchett and enjoyed his work or are made by people who do, and therefore they probably are going to recommend books that are more likely to be your cup of tea. I've already mentioned Pseudopod, the narrated short fiction podcast produced by Kat Day and a whole other team of people. It features short stories written and read by women, including some by Kat Day, so do go and check that out. I'll also recommend Fiction Fans. This is a general fiction podcast hosted by Sarah and Lily. They have read all the Discworld books and quite a few more Pratchetts besides, but they've also read a whole lot of other books. They also do occasionally interviews with authors, and a lot of their books that they cover are written by women. So do check them out. That's Fiction Fans. You can also check out Trash or Treasure. This is a long-running and classic podcast which specializes in romance fiction. It's hosted by Kim and Amy, but they do read other kinds of books too, and there are lots of women authors in their list. They've also read a few Pratchetts. I really want to go and listen to their Pratchett episodes, actually, because I'm sure they have some interesting things to say about his writing of romance. Of course, I can't talk about other podcasts without mentioning The Truth Shall Make Ye Fret, our sibling Pratchett podcast, hosted by Joanna and Francine. It's still going. They finished all of the Discworld books and most of Pratchett's other work. They've still got a few that they're getting through. But now, in their second season, they're kind of reborn and they read other authors. I know, shock, horror, but they no doubt have some great recommendations. And I know that some of their recent episodes do include books by women, including Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. If you go and listen to their opinions on those, I'm sure they'll tell you if they think you would enjoy them or not as a long-time Pratchett podcast listener. Plus, host Joanna Hagan is also a published non-fiction author. She writes mostly about television. Her first two books are about Friends and sitcoms from the 1990s, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and that sort of late 90s era of teen dramas. And look, as a teacher of comedy script writing, I'm able to legitimately claim her books as tax deductions. But, you know, you can read them even if that's not the case. I enjoyed the Friends book quite a lot. As I said, I'm not going to try and make this list exhaustive, but I do have to mention one other podcast, which is a Bridgerton podcast. It's called What Would Danbury Do? It's a book-by-book and episode-by-episode discussion of both the Bridgerton novels and the television adaptations, hosted by Kate and Adele. And they had a third host, Ruby, in the earlier seasons. These days, they usually have a guest host each episode. I mention it because you might recognize a name in the credits. I've been working on the show as an editor for the last 2.5 seasons. It's a great one because every episode contains a recommendation for another book. In the earlier seasons, it was always a romance book, and they did a format where they would pose a question from the heroine in the book to Lady Danbury, the character from Bridgerton. But nowadays they just do a straight up book recommendation. And this is a little teaser, a secret just for you, listener. I'll be appearing on that show as a guest. Yes, I'll be talking about Bridgerton, the TV show. I won't say any more about that. That's just a little teaser for you. But it's a great show. It's a lot of fun. Kate and Adele really know their stuff. And if you enjoy Bridgerton, or even if you enjoy complaining about Bridgerton, which, you know, I think all fans of shows do a little bit of that, you know, they get into the weeds of it. So if you enjoy that, check it out and get some more book recommendations. But look, that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your suggestions. I don't know why I decided to do the frankly ridiculous thing of including every recommendation and trying to have something to say about everyone, even though I've never read most of them. But thank you all so much for these suggestions. Please go out and read something from this list. Is there someone else? Is there another woman that you would recommend as a writer who you think Terry Pratchett fans would enjoy? Let us know. We've got a hashtag for this episode. It's Pratchat IWDTBR. Please send us your recommendations. Can't have too many because we'll probably only read one of them, and hopefully it'll be a good one. But the more you have, the more choice you have, and that's always good. I remember our next episode, which will come out in April, is going to be reading The Folklore of Discworld. That's the collaboration between Terry Pratchett and folklorist Jacqueline Simpson. And we'll have as our guest, and I'm very excited about this, old friend of mine, storyteller Rosalind Quinn. I don't think I know anyone except maybe, I didn't know Terry Pratchett, but I don't know of anyone apart from Terry Pratchett who would know more about stories and folk tales and traditional storytelling than Ros. So I'm very excited to have her on the show, and I think it's going to be a really great discussion. Remember, if you can, get the most recent edition from 2014, which includes material on all the books up until Raising Steam. And if you've got questions for it, you've got a bit of extra time to get them in. You can send them to us on social media using the hashtag Pratchat93, or email us at chat@pratchatpodcast.com, or just reply to us on any of our channels. We'll try and check them all before the episode. But thank you for bearing with us as we have to bump the schedule around. It's not an easy time to make podcasts, and it wouldn't be possible at all without your support. And that's why I don't like to ever leave you empty-eared when we have to change the schedule around. So I hope this has been interesting. I know it's a big, long list of names. I will put them in the episode notes so you can look them up. But thank you again for all of your suggestions. Thank you to all of you for listening. And thank you for subscribing. If you're a subscriber, you make this show possible. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe, but you can also just tell some of the Pratchett fans in your life about the show. That really helps us too. And until next time, read some books by women. You've been listening to Pratchat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast with Pratchatter Ben McKenzie. That's me. Pratchat is produced and edited by me on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. Our music is by David Ashton. We're on social media as Pratchat or Pratchat Podcast, and you can listen to past episodes and support the production of new ones via pratchatpodcast.com. Join the conversation for this episode using the hashtag PratchatIWDTBR.